The snow fell thick as wool, smothering the land in silence, the kind of silence that seemed to hold its breath. Clara May Whitfield pressed her back against the trunk of a pine and clutched the wailing bundle against her chest. Her breath came ragged, pluming into the night, her body trembling from more than the cold. Blood stained the hem of her skirt, already stiff with frost. She had birthed the child alone, without midwife, without sister, without blessing, and now the cries rose thin and desperate against the storm, a beacon of her shame and her survival alike. She thought of Martha, her sister, with the hard-set jaw and steady hands. Martha was now Mrs. Silas Hargrove, seated at a warm hearth, filling the place Clara had fled from. Clara could still hear Silas's laughter in her mind, booming and hollow, see the girth of his body spilling over his belt, his eyes assessing her not as a woman, but as livestock to be purchased. She had run, breathless and weeping, on the very night of her arrival, her suitcase left unopened at the station. And Martha, practical and unflinching, had stepped forward in her stead, saying only, "I will do what you cannot." The town had not forgiven Clara. They called her a coward, a foolish girl who had ruined her chances and stained her family's name. The gossips whispered as she passed, their words cutting sharper than any wind. Ungrateful, selfish, a burden. She had been left with nowhere to go but the edges of the forest, and now the snow had sealed her fate. Her arms ached from holding the child, yet she dared not loosen her grip. The baby rooted blindly at her breast, weak but alive. That small will to live pulled her own breath into rhythm again. She whispered nonsense through chattering teeth, words meant to comfort herself as much as the child. She thought she might lay down then and let the white world cover them both, but the infant's cries refused to be silenced. They rose into the dark, piercing, insistent. Miles away, in a cabin where the forest pressed close, Elias Boone stirred from uneasy sleep. The wind moaned through the pines, carrying with it a sound he had not heard in years, a human cry. He sat upright, the old ache of loneliness pressing on his ribs. His cabin was spare, an iron stove, a table scarred with axe marks, a bed too large for one man, but empty all the same. He lived among timber and sawdust, his days marked by the swing of an axe and the silence of the woods. Elias had once courted a girl back east, a miller's daughter with clever eyes. She had promised to follow him west, but when the letters stopped, so did the dream. He built the cabin anyway, cut the trees, laid the boards. The years hardened into solitude. He spoke little, laughed less, and let the seasons pass like a stream he would not step into. But now, was that truly a cry? He pulled on his coat, heavy with old resin, and stepped into the night. Snow struck his face like needles. He followed the sound, boots sinking deep, his lantern a weak flame against the storm. The forest swallowed noise, yet the cry cut through again, thin but certain. He pressed forward, his heart quickened not by fear, but by something close to duty, or perhaps memory. At last he saw her, a girl collapsed against the pine, hair clotted with snow, a bundle in her arms. For a moment Elias thought he had stumbled into some vision from a tale told by firelight, a mother carved from ice, a babe delivered by storm. But then the infant cried again, sharp and real. He dropped to his knees. "Miss!" His voice was rough from disuse. The girl flinched, her eyes wide, hollow with exhaustion and terror. "Please," she whispered, "don't take her." "I'll take you both," Elias said, though the words sounded strange in his mouth, like a vow he had not prepared to make. He slid his arms beneath her, surprised at the fragile weight. She resisted at first, weakly, then slumped against his chest. The child wailed, but when Elias pressed the bundle close, it quieted as if it, too, recognized safety. The walk back was long, snow dragging at his legs, but Elias bore them with a steadiness that surprised him. In his cabin, warmth struck them like a blow. He set the girl on his bed, stripped off her frozen shawl, and placed the baby near the fire's glow. He moved with the surety of a man long accustomed to tending wounds on himself, stoking flames, heating water, laying broth in a tin bowl. Clara blinked at him through lashes iced together. Why would you help me? Elias met her gaze, then looked away. Because you called out. And I heard. She pressed her lips tight, ashamed of her weakness, yet a tear cut clean through the dirt on her cheek. She turned her face toward the baby, unwilling to let him see more. Through the night, little was spoken. Elias moved quietly, laying logs on the fire, placing water within her reach. Clara shifted, cradling her child, her body shuddering less as warmth returned. When Elias offered broth, she took it with trembling hands. Their eyes met briefly. No words passed, but something softer than gratitude lingered in her gaze, something Elias dared not name. The storm raged outside, yet within the cabin, a hush grew between them, not empty but alive. The baby whimpered, and Clara soothed her with a low hum. Elias sat near the fire, hands outstretched to the heat, his broad back curved in weariness. For the first time in years, the cabin no longer felt hollow. Clara thought of the town, of the sharp eyes that would condemn her if they knew where she lay. She thought of Silas Hargrove, who would laugh if he saw her now, stripped of dignity and reliant on a stranger. Yet as she watched Elias silently mend a tear in her shawl with coarse stitches, a thought stirred in her. Perhaps kindness could be found in the most unlikely places, and perhaps her story was not yet finished. Elias, for his part, studied the fire with a stillness that belied the storm inside him. He had not meant to take anyone in, least of all a girl broken by shame and carrying a newborn. Yet here she was, filling the air with breath and soft sound, altering the silence he had lived in for so long. The flames cracked, casting shadows that danced across her tired face and the infant's tiny fists. Elias found himself wondering not who she had been, but who she might become here, in this place of timber and snow. And as the storm howled against the shutters, Clara closed her eyes, clutching her child, while Elias watched the fire and thought, perhaps the world had brought them together for a reason he could not yet name. When the storm passed, the forest awoke in sharp brilliance, each branch glittering with ice. Clara stood in the doorway of the cabin, her shawl clutched around her shoulders, the baby nestled in her arms. She had not intended to stay beyond the storm, yet her body had not regained its strength, and Elias had made no move to send her away. He chopped wood as if it were the only language he knew, the thud of the axe marking time. She watched him from the threshold, aware of the strangeness of their arrangement. A disgraced girl and a solitary man bound together by winter's will. When they walked into town weeks later, necessity drove them. Supplies dwindled, and Elias could not feed two mouths with venison and broth alone. Clara pulled her shawl tighter, head bent, though she felt the stares before she saw them. Mrs. Della Cartwright's voice cut through the market chatter. So there she is, the Whitfield girl who fled her marriage bed, living in the woods now, shameless as a stray. Murmurs followed, sharp as pebbles underfoot. Elias ignored them, his jaw tight as he loaded flour and salt into his sack. But Clara's cheeks burned. She had thought the snow might have buried her shame, yet here it was resurrected in every whisper. She wished to vanish, but the child stirred against her, and she steadied herself. A woman who carried life could not vanish. At the livery, Silas Hargrove emerged, broad as a wall, his hat tipped low. Martha stood at his side, pale beneath her bonnet. Silas's laughter rolled heavy as thunder when his eyes fell on Clara. Well, the runaway bride returns, but not alone, I see. Whose whelp is that, girl? Do you mean to tell me it isn't mine? Clara froze. Every vein turned to ice. Elias stepped forward, his frame casting shadow. The child is not yours, he said evenly. Silas smirked, though his eyes sharpened. And yet you shelter her, Bone? A fool's errand. That girl carries nothing but ruin. You'll learn. He tipped his hat mockingly and led Martha away, his voice booming with crude amusement as he mounted his horse. Clara's sister never looked back. That night Clara sat by the fire, the baby asleep in her lap. Her hands twisted the shawl's fringe until it frayed. Elias repaired a harness at the table, though his eyes kept straying toward her. At last she whispered, They think I'm unclean, that I deserve none of this. Elias set the leather aside. His voice was low, like timber groaning in wind. I've lived alone 10 years, and no one has asked what I deserve. Doesn't matter. A body's worth is not for others to measure. She looked at him, then, truly looked, and saw the lines loneliness had carved into his face, the quiet dignity with which he bore them. A warmth stirred in her chest, though she dared not name it. The weeks that followed drew them into rhythm. Elias showed her how to swing an axe. Though her strokes were weak and clumsy, he corrected her grip with gentle hands, saying little. She mended his shirts, pricked her fingers raw, but laid them folded at his bedside. The baby's laughter filled the cabin like a bell, and though Elias never reached to hold her, his eyes softened when the child kicked and cooed. Their bond grew not through words, but through gestures. A bowl of broth set quietly at her side, her hand brushing his sleeve as she passed him kindling. Yet gossip traveled faster than snowmelt. Word spread that Elias Boone kept a girl under his roof, a fallen bride with an unnamed child. Mrs. Cartwright whispered to the pastor, who whispered to the sheriff. The town's eyes sharpened with suspicion, not only upon Clara, but upon Elias, the man who dared keep her. It was late one evening, with the sky bruised violet, when hoofbeats broke the forest hush. Elias opened the cabin door to find Silas Hargrove and two farmhands astride horses, their faces red from drink. Silas swung down, his coat straining at the seams, his smile dark. I've come for what's mine, or near enough to it. The girl and the babe. You no claim, Boone. Clara clutched her child, heart pounding. Elias stepped into the snow, axe in hand. His voice was calm, but iron-laced. She belongs to no man, least of all you. The farmhands shifted uneasily, but Silas only laughed, stepping closer, his boots sinking deep. You think you can play hero? You, a hermit with nothing but trees for company? Hand her over, or I'll see you ruined. The air thickened. Snowflakes drifted slow, as if the world itself held its breath. Silas lunged, his hand grasping Clara's arm. The baby wailed, the sound splitting the night. Elias moved with sudden force, knocking Silas back into the snow, the axe's blunt end pressed to his chest. The farmhands reached for their pistols, but a shout cut the air. Enough! Sheriff Amos Kane rode into the clearing, his horse steaming. He had heard the ruckus from the road. His gaze fell on Elias, then on Clara, trembling in the doorway. I've seen enough to know who's in the wrong here. Silas scrambled to his feet, sputtering. She was promised to me. She was promised nothing, the sheriff interrupted. A woman's no man's property. Take yourself home, Silas, before I fine you for disturbance. The farmhands backed away, muttering. Silas glared at Elias, fury burning, but under the sheriff's gaze he mounted and rode off, curses trailing into the dark. Silence lingered after they were gone, broken only by the baby's soft sobs. Elias lowered the axe, his breath steaming heavy. Clara stepped forward, her shawl loose, and for the first time laid her free hand over his, steadying the rough knuckles. No words passed, but gratitude and something deeper coursed between them like fire through dry wood. Later, when the sheriff departed with a nod, Clara and Elias returned inside. The cabin glowed with firelight. Clara rocked the baby, eyes bright not with fear, but with resolve. Elias sat near, his silence no longer hollow but full, as though it carried the weight of unspoken vows. The storm of confrontation had passed, but another lingered in the air, the storm within their hearts, rising quietly, unstoppable. And as Clara lowered her gaze to the child, her voice barely above a whisper, she asked a question that would bind them to a choice neither could escape. Elias, what if we stayed?